A Christian woman can destroy her own home with her bare hands while believing she is building it. This is not about rebellion or intentional harm. This is about something far more dangerous because it hides behind devotion. Right now, countless women are dismantling the very foundations they think they are strengthening, and they will not realize it until the collapse is irreversible. The exhaustion feels holy. The sacrifice looks like obedience. The endless giving appears to honor God. But Scripture reveals a terrifying truth that most will never hear in church. Folly tears down a house with its own hands, and the hands doing the tearing often belong to the most faithful woman in the room. What separates building from destroying is not effort, not intention, not even love. It is something most Christian women have never been taught to recognize, and by the time they understand what was missing, years of invisible damage have already been done. The exhaustion feels virtuous because it looks like faithfulness. A woman pours herself into every crack her family might fall through, believing that if she just carries more, fixes faster, sacrifices longer, God will honor the sheer force of her endurance. She mistakes depletion for devotion. She confuses burnout with blessing. The world applauds this kind of woman, celebrating her tirelessness as strength while she quietly dissolves under the weight of expectations she never questioned. But what if exhaustion is not always obedience? What if the home is not built by doing more, but by becoming something fundamentally different? This question separates those who see spiritually from those who simply survive. Strength without discernment creates structures that look impressive but lack foundation. Effort without wisdom produces motion without meaning. The woman who builds with her hands alone will eventually find those hands empty, even as her house remains standing. Consider the well that runs dry. No one notices at first because the woman keeps drawing from reserves she did not know were finite. She gives to her marriage until the language for her own needs becomes foreign. She pours into her children until her joy feels like something she used to know but can no longer locate. She serves at church, manages the household, maintains the appearance of contentment, all while a quiet erosion occurs where no one is watching. These struggles appear invisible because they lack the dramatic markers of crisis. There is no affair, no addiction, no obvious breaking point. Just a gradual fading of the light that once animated everything. God sees this pain even when no one else does, even when the woman herself has learned to dismiss it as selfishness or ingratitude. Guilt surfaces not as accusation but as recognition. Something holy has been neglected, and the neglect has consequences that ripple through everything she touches. The building of a home begins long before a single task is completed. It starts in the hidden places where a woman decides who she will be when no one is keeping score. The Proverbs 31 woman has been weaponized into an impossible standard, a checklist of achievements that leaves modern women feeling perpetually inadequate. But what if this woman was never meant to represent productivity? What if her strength flows not from performance but from something rooted far deeper? She rises early, yes, but not to earn God's approval. She works with willing hands, but those hands are guided by reverence, not fear. Her lamp does not go out at night because she has learned to tend the inner flame even as she serves the outer needs. The contrast between striving and abiding becomes clear when a woman stops long enough to notice where her energy originates. Does it come from desperation or devotion? From proving or from peace? The answer remains elusive until she is willing to stop moving and start listening. Resentment grows in faithful hearts when no one acknowledges the cost of faithfulness. A woman can love her family and still feel the sting of being taken for granted. She can serve with genuine devotion and still experience flashes of bitterness when her service goes unnoticed. This is where spiritual burnout takes root, in the gap between what she gives and what she receives, in the silence that follows her sacrifices. Christian motherhood fatigue does not discriminate based on the strength of someone's faith. It arrives in the body that aches from being needed without rest. It settles in the mind that spins with logistics but starves for spiritual nourishment. The guilt that accompanies this weariness feels like failure, as if acknowledging the struggle somehow negates the love. But weariness does not disqualify anyone from grace. In fact, it often becomes the doorway through which grace finally enters. Christian emotional healing begins not by denying pain, but by allowing God to comfort what has been systematically ignored in the name of duty. Imagine a cathedral being constructed in complete darkness. The builders cannot see the walls rising, cannot appreciate the arches forming, cannot verify that their work aligns with the original design. They must build by faith, trusting that each stone matters even when the full structure remains invisible. This is how homes are actually built. Not in the moments that garner praise, but in the private exchanges no one witnesses. The tone chosen when frustration feels justified. The prayer whispered before responding in anger. The decision to release control over outcomes that terrify. These invisible choices form the true architecture of family life. The world measures success by what can be photographed and posted, by achievements that fit into conversation, by outcomes that prove effort was not wasted. God measures something else entirely. He sees the foundation being laid in choices that will never trend, in character being formed when no one is watching, in faithfulness that costs everything and earns nothing by earthly standards. Take a moment right now. Not to plan or fix or figure out the next step. Just pause. Ask God to restore strength that service alone cannot replenish. This is not a public declaration or a social media post. It is a private yielding, a quiet acknowledgement that carrying everything has become impossible. The prayer does not need eloquence. It needs honesty. God, restore my strength. God, meet me in this exhaustion. God, help me see what I have been too busy to notice. Let this moment feel sacred rather than instructional, holy rather than hurried. The invitation stands regardless of whether the chaos waits on the other side of this prayer. Something shifts when a woman stops performing for God and starts receiving from Him. The unveiling happens gradually through posture rather than instruction. A godly wife builds by choosing humility over control, which sounds simple until control feels like the only thing preventing complete collapse. She guards her spirit before guarding her schedule, which means disappointing people who expect her availability to be infinite. She allows God to heal what service alone cannot reach, which requires admitting that staying busy has become a strategy for avoiding the deeper work. Strength for women is not the loud kind that announces itself. It is steady, surrendered, spiritually awake. It shows up in the woman who can sit with uncertainty without manufacturing solutions. It appears in the response that reflects Christ rather than defensiveness. It flows from a source that does not deplete, because it is constantly being refilled by something beyond human effort. A godly marriage is shaped more by atmosphere than by arguments. The peace that enters a home often arrives through the heart of a woman who stops fighting battles no one can see. She stops trying to control her husband into becoming who she needs him to be. She stops managing outcomes that belong to God. She stops carrying emotional weight that was never hers to lift. This is not about becoming passive or accepting harm. It is about recognizing which battles are hers and which belong to the one who sees everything her efforts cannot change. Faith for women functions as a stabilizing force rather than a performance metric. It grounds her when circumstances shift. It sustains her when relationships disappoint. It reminds her that the work happening beneath the surface matters more than the results people can measure. The progression moves from heaviness to quiet resolve, from exhaustion to steady trust, from striving to abiding. Picture a woman standing in her kitchen at dawn. The house is still quiet. Coffee brews slowly. Light filters through windows onto floors she has cleaned 1,000 times. From the outside, nothing has changed. Same walls, same furniture, same family sleeping upstairs. But something fundamental has shifted in her. She has stopped building with strength alone and has begun building with wisdom received. She has stopped measuring her worth by her output and has started measuring it by her alignment with God. She has stopped waiting for circumstances to improve before she finds peace and has started finding peace in the midst of circumstances that remain difficult. This shift does not happen all at once. It happens in increments so small they almost go unnoticed. A different response here, a released expectation there, a prayer that finally feels honest instead of performative. The tension introduced at the beginning now returns with clarity. A home can look intact while collapsing internally. Yes, but the reverse is also true. A home can look chaotic while being built on foundations that will outlast every visible structure. The difference lies not in effort, but in the source from which that effort flows. A woman can reorganize every closet, implement every system, follow every biblical principle for homemaking, and still miss the central truth that determines whether anything she builds will stand. The true building material has always been wisdom received rather than effort spent. Wisdom does not come from trying harder. It comes from positioning oneself to hear God clearly. It grows in the soil of humility. It flourishes when a woman stops believing she can manage everything through sheer determination and starts trusting that God's design for her life includes rest, replenishment, and the kind of strength that does not burn out. Scripture provides the authority that stands when emotions fail and circumstances shift. Proverbs 14:1 states with uncompromising clarity, "The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down." Let that truth settle without explanation or softening. The verse does not say the hardest working woman builds her house. It does not say the most organized, most sacrificial, most devoted woman builds her house. It says the wisest woman builds her house, and wisdom is a specific posture toward God that must be cultivated intentionally. Folly, meanwhile, tears down with its own hands, suggesting that destruction can come through action, not just neglect. A woman can actively dismantle her home by building with the wrong materials, by relying on her own understanding instead of seeking divine wisdom, by pursuing an image of strength that actually reflects pride rather than faith. The hands that should build can become the hands that destroy when wisdom is absent. Think of wisdom as water finding its level. It does not force. It does not strive. It flows into the low places, the humble spaces, the areas where a woman finally admits she does not have all the answers. Wisdom requires acknowledging limitations. It grows in the confession that trying harder has not worked and will never work, because the foundation was flawed from the beginning. This is where transformation begins. Not in a moment of dramatic revelation, but in a quiet recognition that the old way of building was exhausting because it was never meant to be sustained by human effort alone. Wisdom comes when a woman stops asking God to bless her plans and starts asking what His plans might require her to release. The contrast between wisdom and folly becomes visible in how a woman responds when life does not cooperate with her vision. Wisdom bends without breaking. It adapts without compromising core values. It grieves losses without becoming bitter. Folly, meanwhile, grips tighter. It insists on outcomes it cannot control. It exhausts itself, trying to force circumstances into alignment with expectations. The woman operating in folly may appear strong on the surface, but her strength is brittle. It will crack under pressure because it lacks the flexibility that comes from trusting God with results. She builds with white knuckles and clenched teeth, and when the structure finally collapses, she wonders why her faithfulness did not protect her from pain. But faithfulness is not the same as wisdom, and effort is not the same as surrender. Consider what it means to build, rather than merely maintain. Maintenance keeps things from falling apart. Building creates something that did not exist before. A woman caught in maintenance mode spends her energy patching holes, managing crises, preventing disasters. She is always reacting, never creating. She keeps the machinery running but forgets to ask whether the machinery is producing anything of value. Building requires vision that extends beyond the immediate need. It asks what kind of legacy is being formed in these daily choices. It considers what her children will remember about the atmosphere of their home. It wonders what her marriage will look like when performance is no longer possible, and only the foundation remains. The woman who builds with wisdom understands that her primary work is internal. External circumstances will shift regardless of her control. Children will make choices she cannot predict. Her husband will have struggles she cannot solve. Financial pressures will appear despite careful planning. Health crises will interrupt the most organized life. But if she has built an internal foundation of wisdom, trust, and spiritual rootedness, these external storms will not destroy what matters most. Her peace will not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. Her faith will not crumble when prayers seem unanswered. Her identity will not fracture when roles change or relationships disappoint. She will stand because she has learned to build on something immovable. There is a specific kind of loneliness that accompanies building with wisdom. The world will not understand or validate this kind of strength. It does not photograph well. It cannot be measured in productivity metrics. It does not earn applause or recognition. The woman who chooses wisdom over performance may find herself misunderstood by those who equate busyness with godliness. She may disappoint people who expect her to say yes to every request. She may frustrate family members who prefer the old version of her, the one who sacrificed her own well-being to maintain their comfort. But she must remember that building for an audience of one requires releasing the need for human approval. God sees the foundation being laid in private. He honors the choices that cost her popularity but preserve her soul. Wisdom also teaches the difference between healthy boundaries and sinful selfishness. Many Christian women fear that caring for their own souls means neglecting their God-given responsibilities. They worry that rest is laziness, that self-care is self-indulgence, that admitting limitations demonstrates weak faith. But wisdom recognizes that a depleted woman cannot pour from an empty vessel. She cannot give what she does not possess. She cannot lead her family toward emotional health if she herself is emotionally bankrupt. Setting boundaries is not about withholding love. It is about preserving the capacity to love sustainably. It is about stewarding her own heart with the same care she gives to others. It is about trusting that God did not design her to carry burdens He never assigned. The restoration process unfolds in layers. Initial changes feel awkward because new patterns have not yet become natural. A woman learning to build with wisdom will second-guess herself frequently. She will wonder if she is doing enough, caring enough, sacrificing enough. Old voices will surface, insisting that godliness requires the exhaustion she is trying to escape. But she must persist through this discomfort, trusting that transformation is often uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. She must remember that feeling guilty does not mean she is wrong. Sometimes guilt is just the old way of being protesting the emergence of something healthier. As wisdom takes root, subtle shifts become apparent. Conversations with her husband soften because she no longer approaches him from a place of depletion and resentment. Interactions with her children carry more patience because she has stopped trying to perfectly control outcomes. Decisions feel less frantic because she has learned to distinguish between her responsibilities and God's sovereignty. Peace does not mean the absence of difficulty. It means the presence of God in the midst of difficulty. It means knowing that her worth is not determined by her performance. It means trusting that what God has called her to do, He will also equip her to accomplish without destroying her in the process. The woman standing in her kitchen at dawn no longer wonders if she is enough. Not because she has achieved some impossible standard, but because she has stopped measuring herself against standards that were never God's design. She has learned that building a home with wisdom means first allowing God to build wisdom into her. She has discovered that the strength she needs does not come from trying harder, but from abiding deeper. She has recognized that the most important work happening in her home is the work happening inside her own heart, and she has made peace with the truth that this work will never be finished, that building is ongoing, that wisdom must be sought daily because circumstances will always present new challenges requiring divine insight. The ending arrives not with neat resolution, but with honest acknowledgement. Every woman reading these words stands at a threshold of choice. The question is not whether her house needs building. Every house needs continual attention, continual wisdom, continual reliance on the one who designed the blueprint. The question is, what materials she will use going forward. Will she continue building with exhaustion, disguised as faithfulness? Will she keep striving in her own strength while calling it obedience? Or will she pause long enough to seek wisdom, to align herself with God's design, to release outcomes she was never meant to control? The choice does not come with a guarantee that life will suddenly become easier. Wisdom does not eliminate hardship. It simply changes how a woman navigates it. The work continues. The challenges remain. But something fundamental has shifted. A woman who sees differently will never build the same way again. She will build with wisdom received rather than effort spent, and that foundation will hold when everything else shakes. This is not the end. This is the beginning. God is present in every unseen choice, every private surrender, every moment when wisdom is chosen over the familiar patterns of striving. The house He builds through her will stand not because she is exceptional, but because He is faithful. And that truth remains steady when everything else feels uncertain.